So, what is it that makes a great leader? Is it some kind of magic they're born with, or is it something anyone can learn? You know, for more than 100 years, people have been searching for the secret ingredients of leadership. Let's dive right in and unpack it.
It really is the classic question, isn't it? Are leaders just born that way, or are they made? Do some people just show up, ready to lead, or can anyone get there with enough hard work? Well, as you're about to see, the answer is a little more complicated than you might think. The first really big scientific attempt to crack this code was something called the trait approach. And the idea behind it was pretty straightforward. If we can just figure out the universal traits that all great leaders share, well, then we could basically create a formula for leadership. So let's take a look at how this hunt for the perfect leadership recipe has played out over the last 100 years or so. It's been quite a journey.
Way back in the early 20th century, all the focus was on these so-called great man theories. Researchers would study these larger-than-life figures, like Abraham Lincoln or Indira Gandhi, and they just assumed that these people were born with special innate qualities that basically destined them for greatness.
Now, what's really interesting here is how you can see the thinking start to shift over time. See, in 1948, a researcher named Stockdale comes along and says, hey, maybe it's not just the traits, maybe the situation matters too. Then over the next few decades, you see guys like Mann and Stockdale again identifying more and more key traits. And by 1991, Kirkpatrick and Locke are talking about the right stuff, this mix of traits you're born with and ones you can actually learn. The search was definitely getting more sophisticated. But there was a big problem. For decades, the research was, it was kind of a mess. You had all these different studies coming up with different lists of traits, and a lot of them contradicted each other. There was just no real consensus, and you can imagine how frustrating that was for researchers.
But then, slowly but surely, out of all that data, a pattern started to emerge. A general agreement began to form around a handful of core traits that just kept popping up again and again in the research.
And here they are, the 5 core traits of leadership that finally came into focus after all those decades of study. So let's take a closer look at each one, because they're all absolutely crucial.
First up is intelligence. And listen, we're not just talking about having a high IQ or being book smart. This is about being a sharp thinker, having strong communication skills, being able to see the big picture, and using solid logic to work through tough problems. For any leader, this is really the foundation of their vision and their strategy.
I mean, think about Steve Jobs. His intelligence was all about vision, not just technology. This quote right here shows how his incredible ability to picture a product and how to create it literally changed the world. It's a perfect example of how a leader's intelligence can shape an entire industry.
Okay, next up is self-confidence. This is that deep-down belief in your own skills and your own abilities. It lets a leader feel self-assured, and that allows them to influence others and truly believe they can make a difference. And this is so important because that certainty, it's contagious. It's what makes people want to follow you, especially when things get tough.
And again, Jobs is just a classic example of this. This quote from a colleague really highlights that unshakable belief he had in his own vision, even when everyone else was skeptical. That kind of self-assurance is incredibly powerful.
The third trait is determination, and this is all about pure grit. It's that relentless will to see things through to the end. It means being proactive, being persistent, and just being driven to hit that goal. For a team, a determined leader is like the engine that just keeps pushing forward, refusing to take no for an answer. They're just relentless.
A really powerful example of this is Dr. Paul Farmer. His determination to bring healthcare to the poorest parts of Haiti was just extraordinary. He fought against incredible odds to build clinics, raise money, and save lives. That's what real-world determination looks like.
The fourth trait is integrity. And honestly, this is the bedrock of leadership. It all comes down to honesty and being trustworthy. Leaders who have integrity are believable, they're dependable. And this matters so much because trust is the glue that holds a team together. Without it, everything falls apart.
And finally, number 5, we have sociability. Sociable leaders are friendly, they're outgoing, and they're diplomatic. They're just really good at building cooperative relationships. And this is absolutely essential for teamwork because a leader who can create a positive social vibe can unlock the potential of their entire group.
Now, the search for leadership traits didn't just stop in the 20th century, of course not. In the modern era, we have much more sophisticated tools from psychology to really understand what makes a leader tick.
One of the biggest tools we have now is the 5-factor personality model. You might have heard of it as the Big Five. It gives us this really solid framework for analyzing personality, and it's been used to find some really strong links between certain personality types and leadership.
So, what has all this modern research found? Well, this chart here shows that extroversion, being sociable and assertive, is the one trait that is most strongly connected to leadership. Conscientiousness, being organized and dependable, is also way up there. This tells us that our basic underlying personality really does play a huge role in our potential to lead.
Another really important modern idea is emotional intelligence, or EQ. And this is all about the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, and just as importantly, the emotions of the people around you. The most effective leaders tend to have a really high EQ, which helps them handle social situations with skill and empathy, and that builds stronger, more resilient teams.
So, what's the final verdict on the trait approach? Is it the perfect tool for picking out our future leaders? Well, the answer is a little more complicated than a simple yes or no.
Look, the trait approach definitely has its strengths. It just makes intuitive sense, and it's backed by a whole century of research. But it has some pretty big weaknesses too. It's never produced one single definitive list of traits, and it often completely ignores the situation. I mean, a leader who's amazing in one scenario might totally fail in another. And that brings us to how the trait approach is most valuable today. Instead of using it like a checklist to pick leaders, its real power is as a mirror for our own self-reflection. It gives us a framework to see our own strengths and, just as importantly, the areas where we can grow.
So this brings us all the way back to our original question, but from a totally new perspective. Maybe leadership isn't just about being born or being made. Maybe it's about choosing. When you look at these core traits, the real question isn't just what makes a leader, but what kind of leader do you want to become? And what will you choose to work on today to cultivate those traits in yourself?